I'm Isla Hughes, 27, a data entry clerk. Hospital lights hum. My son, Dylan, was stable after emergency surgery. No family checked on him. Then, a text from my mother, Martha, landed, not a how is he? Not a where are you? Just a blunt, chilling demand, transfer $10,000 immediately. I stared at the screen, the hospital monitor alarm quietly beeping the soundtrack to my disbelief. They skipped the life and death crisis of their only grandson, yet they had the audacity to demand a huge cash transfer? The question hit me like an electric shock. Was I so purely transactional to them? That moment was the tipping point. The pain turned into cold, clear rage. Their neglect was unforgivable. Their demand was a declaration of war. To understand the $10,000 demand, you need to know the origin story. I was always the family's anomaly, the meticulous, steady earner, a data entry clerk with a reliable, if unexciting, paycheck. My parents, Martha and Frank, and my sister, Vanessa, were the opposite, always chasing the next get-rich-quick scheme or living beyond their means. From the age of 18, my stability became their emergency fund. I was constantly carrying overdue bills, fielding frantic loan requests, and listening to Martha's never-ending pleas for cash. It was a financial dependence disguised as love. Martha and Frank expertly created a system of normalizing my exploitation. They made it seem like it was my duty to keep their unstable ship afloat. They didn't ask for money, they just assumed it. Isla is the stable one, Martha would sigh dramatically to relatives, she can handle it. They never acknowledged my sacrifices, they only reinforced my role as the source of their rescue. This wasn't a temporary favor, it was their permanent entitlement. And the most painful part? Did they genuinely believe their constant taking was a normal, loving family dynamic? My position in the family was brutally simple. I was the dependable one, the quiet, methodical drone whose sole purpose was to keep the bills paid and the drama at bay. My parents didn't treat me like a person, they treated me like the household ATM. You only interact with it when you need a cash withdrawal. I was the one saving diligently for Dylan's future, while every time I got ahead, they found a new financial hole for me to fill. I was the ghost in their luxury, working harder to support a lifestyle that wasn't even mine. And why did I stay? Because confronting them meant chaos, and chaos meant instability for Dylan. I kept choosing care over confrontation. I rationalized their demands, it's just this one time. Their family. Dylan needs safety. My entire world became a balance sheet, juggling their debts and my dreams. I allowed the constant guilt tripping because the thought of an argument escalating and hurting Dylan was unbearable. I was trading my self-respect for what I mistakenly thought was family peace. I was perpetually choosing the lesser of two evils. I spent years believing my role was fixed, but that hospital text shattered the illusion. Their audacity finally broke the dam of my tolerance. Now that you understand the setup, the years of emotional and financial drain, you know this wasn't just about $10,000. The real question is, how did I finally turn that rage into a precise, devastating revenge strategy? I discovered early that my identity was tied to sacrifice. Young Isla was taught to prioritize family needs, so I took second jobs, covered their rent shortfalls, and paid medical co-pays that should have been their responsibility. This wasn't out of love for their chaos, it was fear for Dylan's future. I was absolutely determined that my son would never know the grinding instability, the shame of being poor, or the stress that defined my childhood. The duty wasn't to them, the duty was to break the cycle for him. That sacrifice, born of hope, became my exhausting normal. My entire life, my professional growth, my savings, it was all defined by their lack. My desire to achieve anything personal was constantly outweighed by the perceived duty to fill their bottomless pit. But how do you escape a duty that is constantly being reinforced by guilt and ridicule? Their demands weren't just about money, they were a constant, corrosive stream of financial gaslighting. The texts were polite, dripping with implied guilt. "You're the steady one, Isla, we need this." Meanwhile, Vanessa was posting luxury shopping hauls, paid for, I later found, with my emergency credit card. The cycle was brutal. I worked, I saved, they took, they spent extravagantly, and then they returned with polite guilt for the next withdrawal. The worst part was the hypocrisy, spending my sacrifice while simultaneously ridiculing my quiet, stable life. It was a constant reminder that I was only valuable when I was funding their instability. My resentment began to burn slow and deep, not a flash fire, but a constant coal glowing beneath the surface. Every demand was a pinprick, and every one of Vanessa's frivolous purchases was a deliberate, burning jab at my self-worth. They took my money, and they took my peace. I started seeing them not as family but as financial parasites. That repeated pattern, that deep-seated sense of exploitation, was the foundation of the rage that erupted in the hospital room. It all led to that one final, unpardonable moment of abandonment, but were they even capable of genuine care? For years, my life was a relentless cycle of juggling late shifts at my job, juggling daycare runs for Dylan, and juggling their crisis calls. Every single month, I felt like I was patching holes in a sinking ship. My spreadsheets weren't just about data entry, they were my personal battle plan, a meticulous effort to pay my own bills while simultaneously absorbing their financial fallout. I believed with every exhausted cell in my body that stability equaled safety for Dylan. I sacrificed sleep, friendships, and sanity, convinced that working twice as hard was the only way to insulate my son from the mess they created. I was carrying the financial burden for 3 adults and 1 child. And no one ever saw the weight of the spreadsheets, the anxiety of patching bills, or the stress of covering their unexpected hospital copays. Every time they needed bailing out, it meant 1 more late night, 1 less hour with Dylan, 1 less dollar toward his college fund. Their chaos was my invisible overtime. My exhaustion was their luxury. But the worst part of working this hard for so little acknowledgement is that you start to wonder, if I disappeared, would they mourn the daughter, or just the ATM's suddenly empty status? The bitterest pill to swallow wasn't the work itself, it was the sheer lack of acknowledgement. If I got a bonus, it was immediately hailed as a blessing for the family, and then claimed. If I paid my own rent on time, it was simply expected. There was zero gratitude, only an assumption of my ongoing credit, like an involuntary tax. I remember trying to tell my mother about a small promotion I earned. Her response? "That's wonderful, dear. Now, about that $500 for Vanessa's car payment." My small wins were never mine, they were just immediate sources of leverage for their next request. I internalized that invisibility. If my achievements were immediately repurposed for their benefit, then my personal value was zero. I wasn't Isla, the hard worker, I was Isla, the resource. It was a lifetime of being overlooked, of my identity being minimized to a bank balance. This deep-seated bitterness festered, waiting for the right moment to erupt. They had systematically stripped me of my self-worth, making my compliance their habit. But when the hospital crisis hit, they stripped me of my only true protection, my ability to protect Dylan. Did they truly believe that even that level of abandonment would not finally trigger my break? Everything that happened before, the constant demands, the ridicule, was merely prologue. The real story began on the night of Dylan's surgery. He was in agony. I was frantic. I called them all Martha, Frank, Vanessa. Not once, but 5, 6, 7 times. The hospital corridors became long and cold, my calls echoed into voicemail. I wasn't asking for money, I was begging for support, for a ride, for someone to hold my hand while I signed the frightening consent forms. But there was only silence. Absolute, chilling silence. That silence didn't just hurt, it was a deliberate, active choice to abandon me at my lowest point. Where were the family vows then? Where was the unconditional love they always preached when they wanted me to bail them out? They chose to sleep in their comfortable beds, shielded from my terror. It was a clear prioritization. My trauma was inconvenient. My son's health was irrelevant. After the surgery, the long, cold wait for Dylan to wake up felt endless. The only thing keeping me upright was the realization that I was his only defense. My panic slowly solidified into a resolve. I would never again rely on them for anything, especially not humanity. But after that level of abandonment, how did I react when they finally broke their silence, not with comfort, but with a demand? Days later, as the immediate terror faded, the silence finally broke. Not with an apology, not with flowers, but with that blunt text from Martha, transfer $10,000 immediately. When I asked why the rush, the reason was the final, devastating blow: Vanessa needs help. She overspent on her new apartment. You know how she is, Isla. It wasn't about a life-or-death emergency. It was about funding Vanessa's irresponsible lifestyle. They had skipped their grandson's terrifying crisis, yet they expected me to solve their manufactured one. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of that message was breathtaking. Up until that moment, I was Isla the pleader, Isla the problem solver, always chasing their approval. But reading that text, the one that prioritized Vanessa's luxury debt over Dylan's recovery, flipped a switch inside me. The desperation I felt in the ER vanished, replaced by a seismic shift of rage. The betrayal was complete. I realized I had been pleading for crumbs of decency from people who were only capable of demanding the entire loaf. I was done. The time for care and confrontation was over. It was time for fire. What was the one, boundary-shattering sentence I texted back that finally made them panic? That text, asking for $10,000 for Vanessa's apartment, made me laugh. Not with humor, but a dry, rattling, incredulous sound that was pure bitterness. They were so predictable, so deeply entrenched in their entitlement, that they couldn't even pause their narrative for a few days of my son's recovery. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a sudden, fierce resolve. I typed and deleted several desperate responses. Then, a quiet calm descended. I realized I didn't need to argue. I only needed to state the new rule. This was the moment the ATM machine learned to talk back. My final answer was steady, devoid of emotion, and irreversible. I wanted no room for misinterpretation. My response to Martha's text was swift and concise: I just paid for my son's emergency care. I won't fund more of your chaos. Do not contact me or Dylan again. That was it. The boundary was set, sharp and clear. With 2 more taps, I blocked Martha's number and Vanessa's social media. The simple act of blocking brought a physical, tangible rush of relief, the severing of a painful, decades-long tether. The connection was broken. The bank was officially closed. I sat there, savoring the silence. It was a silence I had paid for with years of my life, but it was finally mine. I knew this wasn't the end. Toxic people don't respect boundaries, they see them as a challenge. My refusal and the blocked contacts were not met with acceptance. They were met with an immediate, furious escalation. They had lost their source of cash, and they panicked. The emotional manipulation was about to turn legal, ugly, and public. They needed to regain control, and they would stop at nothing to drag me back into their orbit. What shocking line did my father cross to force me to abandon my quiet defense and go full-scale scorched earth? My moment of peace lasted about 48 hours. Toxic people don't respect boundaries, they test them relentlessly. Since I'd blocked the main numbers, they switched tactics. Late-night calls came from burner phones, followed by emails dripping with pressure and guilt. Think about your father's health, Isla. You're tearing the family apart over money. It's simple self-care, and you're cruel. The manipulation was clinical, targeted, hitting every emotional pressure point they knew. They tried to paint me as the villain who chose money over family ties. I was bracing for the next guilt trip, but I wasn't prepared for the cold, calculated threats that followed. The pressure escalated into outright harassment. My father, Frank, sent a message from a new account. It didn't ask for money, it was a warning. The text mentioned my workplace, hinting that they would expose old, personal information to my employer if I didn't comply. That was the game changer. They knew I was a data entry clerk. My job relied entirely on trust and a clean record. Moving from emotional leverage to career sabotage was crossing a fundamental line. It was no longer about a cash withdrawal, it was about destroying my financial independence and the stability I had built for Dylan. They had just handed me the evidence I needed. Their clinical harassment wasn't designed to win me back, it was designed to force me into submission. But I wasn't submitting. That threat, exposing my family history to my employer, changed my entire defense. My quiet resolve hardened into tactical determination. They wanted to play dirty? I would play smart. I was done defending, I was going on the offense, legally and precisely. The next day, when my HR department called, what was the first thing they said that confirmed my father had finally crossed the unforgivable line? I was back at my desk, still recovering from the hospital ordeal, when the internal phone chimed. It was Sarah from HR. My blood turned to ice. Isla, can you step into my office? We received a concerning communication about your family situation. My heart hammered, but my data entry training kicked in. Stay calm, process the data. Frank hadn't just threatened, he had acted. He had weaponized my personal life. He crossed the line from a dysfunctional family matter into professional sabotage, threatening the stability that was Dylan's only defense. Sarah showed me the email. Frank had not only detailed my financial contributions to their debts, he had fabricated a story, claiming I was illegally diverting company funds to cover their mounting liabilities. The unforgivable line was crossed, he tried to turn me into a criminal. Sarah's first line was the confirmation I needed. We know it's a lot, Isla, but we need to know why your father is accusing you of money laundering. Money laundering. The words echoed, erasing any doubt or residual affection. They wanted me back in their orbit, but they didn't care if they had to destroy my life to do it. The terror was replaced by a clinical focus. Sarah, I said, my voice steady, this isn't an accusation of theft, it's an act of emotional and financial extortion from family members I cut off. I then laid out the data, the hospital crisis, the $10,000 demand, the harassment. I was a data entry clerk. I kept records. I pulled up spreadsheets detailing every payment I had ever made to them. The documentation was pristine, undeniable. I turned Frank's biggest weapon, his desperate lie, into a legal liability against him. I was done with defense. I was ready to use their own entitlement as the fuel for my revenge. Sarah looked at the spreadsheets, then back at me. Isla, she said slowly, we are so sorry. We see exactly what's happening here. My job was safe. My reputation was intact. Frank's attack had failed spectacularly. But the fear that he could reach into my professional life, that he could jeopardize Dylan's future simply because I refused to fund his daughter's lavish lifestyle, was the final, critical push. It wasn't enough to just cut them off, I needed to permanently neutralize their ability to hurt me. The old Isla would have moved on quietly. The new Isla demanded justice. I went back to my data entry station, feeling lighter, yet heavier with purpose. I opened a new document, titled Project Phoenix. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic or emotional, it would be financial, methodical, and legal, just like me. I knew their vulnerabilities, their debt patterns, and their weaknesses better than they did. I was going to use their greed and entitlement against them. I knew exactly where to strike for maximum impact. What was the first, terrifyingly simple step I took that began the downfall of my entire family? They thought they could destroy my career with a simple lie, but they forgot who I was, a meticulous data entry clerk. My job wasn't just my career, it was my training. Every loan, every payment, every guilt-tripping text was now data, categorized and time-stamped. I had years of proof, a pristine digital ledger of their financial exploitation. My apartment became my war room, littered with spreadsheets detailing their spending, their debts, and their sudden, post-crisis demands. I didn't need emotion, I had cold, hard evidence. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage, it was revenge calculated by a CPA. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. Frank's threat to my job meant the gloves were off. And I needed legal muscle. I found Mr. Peterson, a sharp lawyer who specialized in complex family financial disputes. I walked into his office, dumped 3 years of meticulously documented chaos onto his desk, and laid out Frank's workplace threat. Mr. Peterson studied the spreadsheets, then looked at me. "Isla," he said, "this isn't just harassment. This is a pattern of long-term financial abuse. Your records are incredible. You've already done 90% of our job." His confidence was the first breath of true relief I'd had in years. Mr. Peterson and I devised a dual strategy. Phase 1, a legal response to Frank's workplace sabotage, securing a restraining order against further contact and harassment. Phase 2, the calculated financial attack. I knew their biggest vulnerability was their house, leveraged to the hilt, with multiple outstanding loans I had guaranteed, all documented in my pristine ledger. They used you as a cosigner, Isla. Now we use that. We weren't aiming for money, we were aiming for control. I wasn't just closing the bank, I was shutting down their entire financial institution. The next day, the papers were filed. The first strike was a cease and desist letter and a police report for harassment. The family that ignored my crisis was about to face a crisis of my creation. They were about to learn what happens when the ATM decides to withdraw its own investment. What was their shocking, desperate reaction when they received the legal papers? The day the papers were served felt less like a legal maneuver and more like a declaration of war. We sent 3 things: the cease and desist letter, a preliminary police report citing harassment and career sabotage, and a carefully worded notice regarding their outstanding cosigned debts. The message was clear and cold: stop or face consequences. I watched Mr. Peterson seal the envelopes, feeling a surge of power I hadn't known since I was 18. I wasn't begging them to stop, I was legally compelling them. Their toxic attempts to destroy my stability had just given me the right to destroy theirs. I didn't see their faces when the papers arrived, but I could hear the panic in the voicemails they left before my phone finally recognized and blocked their new number. Martha's usual theatrical guilt trip was replaced by genuine, shrieking terror. "Isla. What is this? You're making a huge mistake. You can't report your own father to the police. We're family. This is crazy." They were finally experiencing the kind of existential chaos I had been managing for them for years. The money threats had failed. The career sabotage had failed. Now, the one language they understood, legal vulnerability, had spoken. They hadn't anticipated this. They expected me to eventually cave. I felt a wave of cold satisfaction. For the first time, they were the ones who were desperate and powerless. They tried one final manipulation, a call from a distant uncle, begging me to reconsider for the sake of family unity. But I was unbreakable. My decision to protect Dylan had become my shield. The warning shot was fired, but the real war, the calculated financial ruin I had planned, was about to begin. The final play was about their greatest fear, losing the house. Was this warning enough to make them stop, or did I have to proceed with the legal strategy that would dismantle their entire life? Their initial reaction to the legal papers was exactly what I predicted: sheer, theatrical denial. Martha probably tossed the envelope on the kitchen table, convinced it was just a flimsy threat. Isla is just being dramatic. She's bluffing to keep the 10,000. She would never report her own father. It's just a lawyer trying to scare us. They truly believed their emotional manipulation held more weight than a formal cease and desist. This belief was the product of a lifetime of my compliance. They were too blinded by entitlement to grasp that I had finally traded guilt for strategy. The disbelief lasted until Vanessa, ever the detective when her comfort was on the line, Googled Mr. Peterson. The moment she read his specialization, complex family financial disputes, the panic became real. Frank had not only lied to my employer, but he had opened the door to their entire financial history being scrutinized. The realization that I had documentation of every penny they'd ever taken must have hit them like a physical blow. The frantic voicemails started then, not the usual demanding kind, but the hysterical, terrified ones. They were realizing that Isla the ATM was now Isla the prosecutor. Their next move was predictable, desperate emotional blackmail. They tried contacting Dylan's school, hoping to exploit my parental boundary, but I had prepared for that, too. The final attempt was a frantic, tearful call from Martha to a mutual, distant cousin, begging them to intervene. "Tell her we'll pay her back. Just make her stop. She's trying to destroy us." That word, destroy, was music. They were finally seeing their own actions reflected back at them. They realized the money wasn't coming, and the legal threat was real. What was the next strategic step I took that shifted the focus from merely harassment to their deepest financial ruin? The legal papers acted like a grenade in the extended family. Initially, everyone tried to side with Frank and Martha, painting me as the heartless daughter who sued her sick father. But when Mr. Peterson leaked a carefully curated summary, mentioning the financial abuse, the co-signed loans, and the hospital abandonment, the narrative shifted violently. Suddenly, the whispers weren't about my cruelty, they were about their greed. People started asking questions about where their own gifts to Vanessa went. The facade of the perfect family shattered publicly. The best evidence of the public blowback came from Vanessa. Unable to control her fury, she posted a frantic, paragraph-long rant on social media, accusing me of lying and destroying their lives. But in her haste, she slipped, mentioning several key details about her debt that directly contradicted her parents' stories. I captured the screenshot, of course. That unedited moment of public meltdown confirmed everything Mr. Peterson needed to prove financial abuse. She didn't realize that in her attempt to destroy my credibility, she had officially signed away the last shreds of her own. The truth, once hidden, was now their biggest enemy. While the public storm raged, I found a profound, almost spiritual peace. My apartment was quiet. There were no frantic phone calls, no hidden text messages, no guilt-ridden pleas. I sat on the sofa, watching Dylan sleep soundly, knowing that he was finally, truly safe. That security was worth every sacrifice, every document I filed. The legal war was messy, but the private reward was pure catharsis. I had taken back my life, not with a burst of rage, but with the systematic closure of a decade-long wound. The abuse had ceased. Peace didn't mean surrender. With the harassment officially on the legal record, it was time for Phase 2, the calculated financial ruin. I instructed Mr. Peterson to stop holding back. The key was the co-signed mortgages on the main house and Vanessa's condo. They thought I would never risk their house, but they underestimated my commitment to Dylan's future. By calling in my guaranteed portions, we forced a debt restructuring they couldn't possibly manage. They were about to find out that a lack of liquidity is the true cost of their entitlement. The financial dominoes began to fall immediately. First, the bank refused to refinance the co-signed loans without full payment. Then, Vanessa's condo, bought with my credit, went into foreclosure. The family scrambled, trying to find another ATM, but my legal actions had blacklisted them. They faced a tsunami of debt they had caused, but couldn't fund. It was beautiful, seeing my spreadsheets translate into tangible consequence. I hadn't set out for this level of destruction, but they had forced my hand. They chose war, I chose the battlefield. The ultimate victory wasn't the silence or the financial ruin, it was the ability to protect my son without conditions. The family lost their house, their financial freedom, and their grip on me forever. They suffered the consequences of their entitlement. They were the ones begging for a loan. They were the ones abandoned. But did they truly learn their lesson, or did they blame me until the very end? And what was the final, devastating piece of evidence I released that ensured they could never manipulate another family member again? The money that was supposed to fuel their endless consumption, the money I had earned and was now free to reclaim, was never going back to their debt spiral. Instead, it became the foundation of Dylan's new reality. I met with a financial advisor and set up an education trust fund for him, legally locked and totally unreachable by my former family. Every penny I saved from their grasp went directly into his future. This was the true meaning of winning, transferring resources from destruction to creation. It wasn't about revenge in the end, it was about building an impenetrable wall of stability around my son. I closed the ledger detailing their debts and opened a new one detailing Dylan's growth. The power they derived from my subservience was completely gone. I wasn't just financially stable, I was sovereign. My income was mine. My decisions were mine. They lost their asset, but I gained my life. The whole revenge was just a necessary, strategic cleanup operation. But even as the financial dust settled, I still had one final piece of evidence, the last line of defense, that needed to be released to truly ensure my permanent safety. What was that final, critical public action that completely sealed my family's fate? Securing Dylan's money was only the start of establishing our permanent, untraceable freedom. My family derived power from the old records, my old name, my co-signed debts, my accessible address. The practical steps for a clean break were radical but necessary. I legally dropped my father's surname and reclaimed my grandmother's maiden name. The name was symbolic. I rejected the abusers and embraced the memory of the one person who showed me genuine love. Then I changed my banking institution and filed a change of address with the post office for all legal documents. I was erasing their historical access to me. Mr. Peterson handled the final, official severing. The restraining order against Frank and Martha was granted, legally prohibiting them from contacting Dylan or me, or approaching my workplace. But the final financial move was the most satisfying. He informed them that if they pursued the matter, he would publicly release the full, 15-year financial ledger I had meticulously kept. That ledger contained evidence of tax avoidance, fraud, and illegal loan structuring, enough to guarantee a full IRS audit. The fear of public criminal prosecution was the final deterrent. The consequences for Vanessa were swift and unavoidable. Her newly renovated condo, which they demanded $10,000 to save, went into foreclosure. The bank simply wouldn't renegotiate the loan that was guaranteed by the very person who had just cut them off. I didn't take the condo, I simply withdrew my financial security from it. I saw the local news mention the foreclosure, a small, insignificant article to everyone else, but for me, it was proof of concept. Their entire lifestyle, built on my silent compliance, was collapsing under the weight of their own greed. The final piece of the puzzle was the co-signed mortgage on the family home. With their financial history exposed and the threat of an IRS investigation looming, they were forced to sell quickly to cover their extensive debts. Weeks later, I drove by. The house was empty, the yard overgrown. No signs of life. It was a monument to their entitlement. I felt no malice, only a profound emptiness, the space where family should have been. I didn't cheer their loss, I simply recognized the consequence. The destruction was theirs, and the silence was mine. I packed away the physical evidence, the years of checks, the hateful texts, the spreadsheets detailing their abuse. I sealed the box and marked it closed. I had spent my life as a supporting character in their drama, the reliable victim. But now, the story was over. I was the protagonist of my own life, and my son was safe. The family that abandoned us in our greatest moment of need were now fully and permanently estranged. There was no reconciliation, no last-minute apology. Just the beautiful, steady rhythm of a new life. The final victory was not financial, but emotional. My family taught me the hardest lesson of all: you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. They forced me to use their own greed as the instrument of their downfall. And I did it, not out of malice, but to protect the only person who mattered. So, that's my story. It's a story of survival, of cold, hard data, and of choosing my child over chaos. What do you think? Was my revenge too extreme, or was it the only way to finally break free? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Once the noise and the legal drama faded, I was left with a strange silence. And in that silence, a toxic, insidious emotion began to creep back in: guilt. Despite knowing I acted to protect Dylan from genuine abuse, the lifetime of conditioning, family first, no matter what, didn't vanish overnight. I'd destroyed their entire life. Wasn't that cruel? I questioned my own sanity, wondering if I had become just as cold as they were. Healing is not linear. There are moments when the old, programmed version of you tries to trick you back into subservience. I had to consciously remind myself that their destruction was a direct consequence of their choices, not my malice. To battle the guilt. I looked back at the evidence, not the financial documents, but the emotional ledger. I recalled sitting alone in that hospital waiting room, terrified, while they demanded cash for a party. I remembered Frank threatening my job, and Martha claiming I was cruel for needing basic self-care. That's when the clarity returned. My actions were the consequence of their fundamental lack of empathy. I didn't destroy them, they destroyed their own support system and, by extension, themselves. It wasn't victory over them, it was victory over the trauma they had inflicted. That was the key to moving forward, recognizing the difference between consequence and cruelty. The wounds remain, but the active bleeding has stopped. Every time the doubt crept in, I looked at Dylan, safe and thriving. That was my anchor. I had traded a dysfunctional, dependent past for a challenging, but sovereign future. The scars are proof of survival, not shame. I haven't forgiven them, and I won't. But I have achieved peace. The final stage of this story is not about what they lost, but what I gained: a life free from their chains. What was the ultimate, unexpected positive outcome I found in my life, years after the dust settled and the fight was truly over? The chaos of cutting off my blood family created a vacuum, but into that space stepped the true allies. Sarah from HR, who could have fired me but instead saw the evidence of abuse, became a close friend. She didn't offer guilt, she offered support. My neighbor, who had watched me quietly struggle for years, became a trusted babysitter for Dylan. These were not people bound by obligation, but by choice and genuine kindness. They listened to my story without judgment and helped anchor my new life. I learned that not all family is determined by DNA, some are determined by decency. We started building our chosen family brick by brick. For Dylan, this meant playdates where no one asked why grandma never visited. And birthdays filled with genuine laughter, not mandated performances. For me, it meant potlucks and late-night calls about normal, non-financial life problems. This new community valued contribution and respect, not debt and drama. I realized that the love and support I desperately craved had always been available. I was just too busy trying to earn it from the wrong people. The pain of losing my blood family was replaced by the joy of finding my real one. I continued therapy, focusing on dismantling the emotional programming of codependency. My therapist helped me understand that my years of silence and financial enablement had actually been a form of self-harm. My revenge wasn't just about financial security. It was a desperate, if ruthless, act of self-preservation. The ultimate victory was not the foreclosure, but the self-respect I earned by fighting back. The realization hit me: I was a good person, a good mother, and my boundaries were valid. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting my child. Life is peaceful now. The house is small, but the bills are mine, and mine alone. Dylan is happy, secure, and will never know the chaos that defined my youth. Sometimes I wonder about Frank and Martha, now forced to rely on government assistance and the kindness of strangers. But those thoughts are fleeting. They made their bed of entitlement, and I made my bed of peace. The only future I care about is the one I'm building with Dylan and our chosen family. Was their downfall truly the end of my trauma, or does the legacy of family abuse continue to haunt me in unexpected ways, even years later? I knew that for a family built on entitlement, true repentance was impossible. Once the initial shock of losing the house wore off, panic turned into profound rage. Their final, unblocked attempt to contact me came from a frantic phone call, not an apology, but a furious torrent of blame. "You ruined us, Isla. You did this to your father. We wouldn't be like this if you had just loaned us the money." They were incapable of recognizing their own accountability. They didn't see the logical outcome of their actions, they only saw my betrayal. The call ended, not with a plea, but with a threat. They were going to tell everyone the truth about the cruel daughter. Their promise wasn't idle. They orchestrated a campaign among the small, distant pocket of relatives who still supported them, the ones who also valued entitlement over facts. Posts appeared on social media, describing me as a spiteful, money-hoarding monster who let her sick father be homeless. It was a masterful, if predictable, piece of character assassination. They even tried contacting my workplace again, claiming I had misled the initial HR investigation. But I was ready. This was the final battleground, not the courtroom, but the public narrative. Mr. Peterson told me they were relying on the fact that I had never fully released my evidence. "Isla," he said, "they believe you will flinch. You've won the war. But they're trying to win the propaganda battle." The choice was simple: let them continue to poison my reputation, or deploy the final, devastating piece of truth. I didn't want to hurt them more, but I had to secure my freedom. I gave the final nod to release the full, unedited transcript of Frank's hospital call, the one where he demanded cash while Dylan was in critical condition. We released the transcript to every single person who had been contacted by Frank and Martha's smear campaign. Hearing the raw audio, Frank's demanding voice and Martha's cold, financial calculations against the backdrop of a hospital monitor beep, was the tipping point. It wasn't just a threat. It was proof of emotional depravity during my son's medical crisis. The reaction was immediate and decisive. The handful of remaining supporters vanished. They finally understood the truth. I hadn't destroyed them, I had merely exposed them. The consequences weren't just financial and reputational, they were absolute. Not only did Frank and Martha lose their home and their remaining allies, but Vanessa, whose own debt was now public knowledge, found herself completely isolated. She sent me one final, furious text, calling me a psychopath, before I blocked her number forever. I didn't need to reply. My silence was the ultimate answer. The family circle, which had once been a chain around my neck, was now completely broken. They were alone in the ruins of the life they built on my back. The fight was over, but the victory wasn't purely sweet. I was mourning the family I wished I had, not the one I lost. I felt the profound sadness of knowing that the bond of blood had been severed by their own choices. This wasn't a happily ever after, it was a necessary amputation. But the relief of knowing Dylan would never face their brand of cruelty outweighed the cost. I had traded the illusion of family for the reality of safety and peace. I learned to define family not by shared DNA, but by shared decency and mutual respect. My life is now stable, predictable, and funded only by my own hard work. The scars of the past remain, but they no longer control my future. I won, not by being crueler than them, but by being more disciplined and methodical. I saved myself, and I saved my son. Was there any possibility of reconciliation years later? or did I have to completely seal the vault on this chapter of my life forever? Just when I felt the full weight of their smear campaign, the unexpected happened. My chosen family fought back for me. Sarah, my HR ally turned friend, contacted every mutual acquaintance they tried to poison, detailing the ethical violations Frank committed at my office. She didn't gossip, she presented facts. My neighbor, who had seen me rush Dylan to the hospital, confirmed the timeline of my son's medical crisis, directly countering their lie about neglect. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. One friend, who had previously been manipulated by my sister, posted a powerful, public statement. She didn't attack Martha or Frank, she simply stated, Isla is a mother who prioritized her child's health and her own solvency over a toxic, parasitic family system. I believe her. That validation, coming from someone who had witnessed their manipulation firsthand, was more powerful than any legal document. It wasn't pity I received, it was respect. The toxic narrative they desperately tried to build was crumbling, not because of my efforts, but because good people chose to speak up for the truth. I finally felt seen, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The allies speaking up gave me the emotional strength to complete the final practical steps. With the restraining order active and my reputation defended, I closed the last credit card linked to my old family's accounts, a ghost of my codependent past. I changed the locks and installed a new security system. I transformed my physical space into a fortress of security. This wasn't just about financial protection, it was about emotional closure. The attempts at contact faded to nothing. They had been completely defanged, not by force, but by truth and collective support. The most important lesson of this entire ordeal is that self-protection is not selfish, it is necessary. By prioritizing my son's welfare and my own self-respect, I allowed the true, healthy people in my life to finally shine through. The family that breaks you is never the one that heals you. My revenge was a surgical strike against abuse, and my peace is the proof of its success. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I would do it again in a heartbeat. Looking back, what was the one defining trait I developed during this fight that truly secured my freedom and could help others break free from toxic cycles? The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the tense, expectant silence of waiting for the next financial crisis, but genuine tranquility. My apartment, small but entirely mine, became our sanctuary. There were no hidden agendas in the mail, no guilt trips in the voicemails, and no frantic knocks at the door. This was the new normal, boring, predictable, and blissfully safe. I reorganized my finances, paid off my real student debt, and started focusing on my career goals that had been shelved for a decade. The absence of drama felt like a luxury I could finally afford. The clearest sign of victory was Dylan. Free from the underlying anxiety and the sudden, chaotic phone calls. He thrived. His grades improved, he made friends easily, and his laughter became louder and less hesitant. He wasn't aware of the war I had fought, but he benefited fully from the peace I had won. A healthy, stable parent produces a healthy, stable child. Seeing him grow up without the shadow of my family's financial need hanging over us was the ultimate reward. His future, once a bargaining chip, was now a solid foundation. At work, my productivity soared. When you're not constantly fighting fires at home, you can actually focus on your job. That year, I received a major promotion and a significant raise. My boss, knowing the truth from the HR file, simply said, "You deserve this. Isla. Focus on your future." The professional vindication was sweet. It proved that the incompetence Frank tried to use to threaten me was nothing more than exhaustion from carrying his debt. I rebuilt my career, my finances, and my reputation from the ashes they tried to leave me in. Now, my boundaries aren't just legal, they're inherent. I don't apologize for saying no. I teach Dylan the true value of money and the even greater value of self-respect. He knows that family means kindness and support, not obligation and exploitation. I was breaking the toxic generational cycle, the real victory. I made a vow, the trauma stops with me. Every decision I make is viewed through the lens of protection, not provision for abusers. I am no longer defined by the money I save or the money I spend, but by the peace I keep. Looking at the old family photos now, I don't feel the sting of betrayal, but a detached, clinical acceptance. They are simply people who made terrible choices. My emotional investment is gone. I achieved true freedom when I realized that their need for my drama was greater than my need for their approval. The power shift was complete and irreversible. I no longer need their apology or their recognition to validate my worth. My self-worth is self-generated. The revenge story ended when I stopped allowing them to be the narrator of my life. The trust fund I established for Dylan is the ultimate symbol of my success. It grows steadily, reliably, protected by legal firewalls. It's an anchor of stability they can never touch. My success isn't defined by the size of my bank account, but by the fact that I can look at that account and know that every penny in it is ethically earned and responsibly managed. I transformed myself from an ATM into an investor. This financial independence ensures that if they ever try to resurface, their tactics will be immediately nullified. Freedom isn't just a concept, it's a meticulously managed ledger. People ask if I regret the destruction. I regret the necessity of it. But I do not regret the action. Revenge, for me, was never about feeling good, it was about stopping the harm. The satisfaction lies not in their suffering, but in my silence. Their chaos is no longer my problem. I chose survival over sentimentality. This whole journey was less about getting even and more about getting free. And in that freedom, I found a love and respect for myself I didn't know I deserved. Did they ever once try to contact me after the transcript release, or did the silence become truly permanent? The furious text messages, the desperate phone calls, the smear campaign, they all dried up. The silence I once craved had become absolute, a solid, impenetrable wall. There were no more holiday cards, no attempts to reach Dylan through school, and no dramatic pleas through shared acquaintances. The restraining order and the public release of the truth had done their job. They finally understood that I was not an asset to be recovered, but a threat to be avoided. Their final act of control was simply to disappear, relinquishing any claim they thought they had over my life. I occasionally heard whispers of them. Frank and Martha had moved further away, living in cheap rentals, perpetually arguing over who was to blame. Vanessa had lost her job and was bouncing between relatives who were quickly tiring of her debt and drama. The world had simply moved on. The few remaining distant relatives who reached out did so not with judgment, but with curiosity, hoping for gossip. I gave them none. I simply said, our chapter is closed. I felt no schadenfreude, only the cold, sobering truth that they had lost everything because they refused to change anything. True acceptance is not forgiveness, it's recognizing that the situation is beyond your control and releasing the emotional labor. I accepted that they would always see me as the villain, and I was finally okay with it. Their narrative had zero impact on my reality. The constant need to defend myself, to prove my worth, had dissipated. I saw a different person in the mirror now, one with genuine peace in her eyes, not the hollow exhaustion of a lifelong victim. The emotional scars became quiet reminders, not open wounds. Dylan is in high school now, a confident, secure young man who knows his mother always puts him first. His future is secured, and he will never have to choose between his ambition and his parents' debt. That, above all, is my success. I broke the generational chain of financial and emotional servitude. I never had to explain the details of the past, the quiet stability of our present was explanation enough. He understands the value of earning, saving, and respecting boundaries. His innocence was preserved by my strategy. The biggest, most unexpected positive outcome was the capacity to love again, healthily and without codependency. Years after the divorce, I met a wonderful person who saw my strength, not my history. He values my boundaries and respects my fiercely protective stance toward Dylan. I learned that true partnership is built on mutual respect and shared freedom, not shared trauma or debt. I no longer look for a partner to save me, but one to walk alongside me. This relationship is the final proof that I fully healed. The true victory wasn't the look on Frank's face when he realized he was broke. It was the moment I stopped thinking about their faces entirely. The financial data was just the tool, the emotional liberation was the goal. I got my life back, but more importantly, I got my peace of mind back. My financial ledger is now filled with investments, not payments for others' mistakes. That is the lasting legacy of the revenge, a meticulous, detailed plan that shifted control from the abusers to the survivor. I am accountable only to myself and my son. So, did they ever try to contact me again after the transcript release? No. The silence became truly permanent. They valued their reputation more than their child, and once that was gone, they had nothing left to leverage. That's the final, cold fact of the matter. My action was the only path to true, permanent closure. I saved us both. I hope my story gives you the courage to choose your own peace, no matter the cost. Before we wrap up this intense series, I have one final question for you. What do you think was the biggest mistake Frank and Martha made that guaranteed their entire downfall? Once the silence was permanent, I realized my story couldn't end there. I had achieved peace, but thousands of people were still trapped in cycles of financial and emotional abuse from their own families. I started writing, not a memoir, but a guide. I wanted to turn my meticulous, cold-blooded revenge plan into a blueprint for others' escape. My vulnerability became my greatest strength. Sharing the darkest parts of my journey, the initial panic, the shame of codependency, felt like the final cleansing. The goal was to demystify the process of cutting off toxic family ties. I packaged my legal and financial strategies, how to document abuse, how to use HR and local laws, how to establish an unassailable financial firewall, into an online resource. I call it the Sovereignty Protocol. The focus is always on facts, not feelings. If they tried to weaponize emotion, I taught others to weaponize documentation. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from people all over the world, calling me their financial guardian angel or their peace champion. The purpose I gained was far greater than the revenge I achieved. The deepest trauma of toxic family systems is the code of silence. You're taught that criticizing family is the ultimate sin. But I stood on stages and spoke the truth. You have the right to self-preservation. I emphasized that escaping is not a failure of love, but an act of profound self-love. I didn't tell people to seek revenge. I told them to seek freedom, and to document everything along the way. The sound of my own voice, no longer muffled by fear or obligation, became the most powerful force in my new life. My advocacy is also my legacy to Dylan. I'm not shielding him from the story, but teaching him the lessons of the story. I taught him that strength is not about crushing enemies, but about setting firm, unyielding boundaries. He sees me using my voice to help others, turning trauma into purpose. His childhood is defined by peace, not power struggles. He knows that the ultimate measure of success is not how much you accumulate, but how much you are free to keep, both financially and emotionally. This is how the cycle truly ends. The final stage of my resolution wasn't external, it was internal. I had to detoxify my nervous system from years of fight or flight mode. It required deep, sustained self-care and meditation to quiet the anxiety programmed by my family. I consciously chose stillness over chaos. I no longer react to triggers, I observe them, recognize them as ghosts of the past, and let them pass. This inner work is the hardest part of any family revenge story, the cleanup after the bomb has dropped. The revenge provided the space, but the self-work provided the peace. The global community I found through sharing my story is the antithesis of the isolation my family imposed. The comments section is a place of shared survival, not toxicity. We trade tips, offer validation, and celebrate each other's small victories. I realized my family's attempt to destroy my reputation had instead built me a global community of support. They tried to make me an outcast. I became a guide. We are the generation that refuses to let blood be thicker than boundaries. Do I regret the devastation I caused to my family's financial stability? No. Regret belongs to the victims of the situation, and in this case, the victims were Dylan and me. The only thing I regret is the decade I spent trying to save them instead of saving myself. My only wish is that I had acted sooner. I found my self-worth in the fight, and my peace in the aftermath. That is the core message of my story: protect yourself first. But, looking ahead 5 years from now, do I believe their complete silence will ever be broken by a new, desperate plea? If you take one thing from my journey, let it be this: boundaries are not a form of cruelty, they are the ultimate act of self-preservation. My revenge was simply the consequence of holding those boundaries when they demanded destruction. I broke free by changing the game from an emotional battle to a documented, strategic war. Never let anyone tell you that protecting your child and your future is selfish. It is your sacred duty. The end of their entitlement was the beginning of my true freedom. My life is now a testament to the fact that you can rebuild, no matter how toxic the foundations you inherited. Start documenting. Start saving. Start saying no. Your peace is worth the fight. Don't just survive the toxic cycle, escape it, then turn back and show others the way out. What is the first document you need to gather to start building your own sovereignty protocol? This entire saga boils down to 5 crucial lessons for anyone facing a toxic family. First, document everything. Facts neutralize emotion. Second, legal firewall. Establish boundaries that abusers cannot cross. Third, self-worth is non-negotiable. Your financial security is your child's safety net. Fourth, choose peace over sentimentality. Sentimentality is a weakness they will exploit. Fifth, break the cycle. Your freedom is your legacy. These are not just guidelines, they are survival strategies. They are the sovereignty protocol. If you are ready to start implementing the sovereignty protocol and take back your life, I want to hear from you. Hit the like button and tell me in the comments, which of these 5 lessons resonates most deeply with your current situation? If this story gave you the courage to choose yourself. Subscribe now and join our community of survivors. We share strategies, not pity. Your first step to freedom is just one click and one comment away. Don't wait another day to secure your peace.